All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Java with Otava. We are joined today by representatives from both VMware and Veeam. So before we get started, let me go through and introduce our panelists today. Corinne, let's start with you, please.
Hi, I'm a technologist from Veeam Software. I do a lot of support between what's out in the field and in our development area to see what we can improve on in our product.
Thank you. Jim?
Hello, everybody. Jim Lubinsky. I am in charge of the cloud and infrastructure here at Otava. Just joined the company a month ago, have an extensive experience around fintech, healthcare as a CIO, and other tech responsibilities. Glad to be a part of this. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jim. And Sean, over to you, sir.
Hey, morning, Jeremy, and morning, everyone. Yeah, Sean Smith. I'm one of the system engineers supporting Otava on everything VMware. So working with them on a lot of the VMware solutions that they are making available to all the customers. Great to be on board with this, Jeremy.
Fantastic. Well, thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. By order of introduction, I'm Jeremy Bigler. I head our product management, product strategy here at Otava. So with that said, let's dive in. Now, before we start our slide content, we're going to do a quick poll to see some of our attendees' top priorities looking forward to 21. You could just take a moment, pick what might be keeping you up at mind or what might be top of mind for you heading into the new year. We'd love to get some live feedback from the audience today. Appreciate your feedback. All right, we'll give it just a few more seconds and then we'll continue going. All right, let's move forward. Carrie, how do we do on our responses there? What was our top? Oh, there we go. Cloud infrastructure is top with 31% of you, followed closely by cybersecurity, and looks like data analytics or business intelligence. Well, thank you for actually aligning directly to our agenda today. Looking forward to going through those topics with you all. With that said, let's get started. Right, so no surprise here, right? We see a lot of interest in 21 from organizations that we've been speaking to. These are surveys that were done by Pulse and a few other folks out there. Number one, as we move more and more of our systems into IT and depend more on IT for automation, remote workforce, connectivity, etc., ransomware becomes a key point of concern, I think, for a lot of the folks that we've been speaking to. Digital transformation, we're going to be diving into that fairly extensively as a method for not only evolving our business, but also driving business growth and business performance. Permanent remote work options, right, as we sort of try to identify what our new normal looks like. And we see a lot of organizations moving now more to a permanent distributed workforce model. Compliance continues to be important, as well as cybersecurity holistically beyond just ransomware. Sean, Corinne, I'm curious from your perspectives, any additional topics that we see of interest in the 21 calendar year?
I'd say education of our end users is going to be something of a big topic. I see that we want to jump into cloud, but we want to also make sure that we're jumping into cloud appropriately and protecting ourselves on this new platform that we're getting used to, for sure.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I would just add, with the number 3 there, the remote working options, obviously comes a lot of security issues, and being able to have an end-to-end security solution that's really going to provide a safe working environment, whether you're in the office, at home, on the beach, as a lot of people have been over the last few months, right? So being able to tie all of that together and find security solutions that fully integrate end to end, I think is important too.
Absolutely. And that's a great segue into our next topic here, which is unfortunately, with the advent of a remote, mobile, or distributed workforce, right, that poses a unique security challenge from the threat landscape to a lot of the organizations that we've been dealing with. We look at some of the data out there and understand that number one, ransomware and similar attacks, right, social engineering attacks holistically, are certainly on the rise. I think we'd all agree with that, right? But interestingly enough, they are tied to specific things that we've seen. Now, this is obviously coming out of the COVID-19 impetus here, but we see now with the distributed workforce, employees that are connecting into environments across VPNs or similar, right, unfettered access into corporate environments. We see that now spiking with changes in what our current pandemic landscape is, with new news or new advents, right? Really leveraging social engineering and the hype of a lot of the concern or the fear around the pandemic and other issues related to that, which is really interesting. And unfortunately, we see a lot of that focus being in finance. We see a lot of that focus being in healthcare today. And it is, again, leveraging, I think, a lot of the concern and a lot of the unprotected remote workforce that has come as a result of the pandemic. I'm curious, Corinne, specifically, I know that Veeam has been deeply involved in a lot of the ransomware protection and helping to protect organizations. Does this align with what you've seen in the market thus far?
I'd say yes, and I'd say that a lot of distributors of ransomware know that backup is one of the key points to help protect against that, because now they're starting to attack that as a vector. There was a report put out by Sophos that they know in backup softwares are being specifically targeted because they know how valuable we can be in the back end to protect against this.
Makes sense. And Sean, I know VMware has made some significant strides in endpoint protection with Carbon Black and some of the app defense technologies at the hypervisor level. Is this something that VMware has also seen from an attack vector perspective? And then we talk a little bit about how to help minimize or mitigate that risk factor.
Yeah, 100%. VMware acquired Carbon Black a while ago. It was actually pre-COVID. But obviously, we've been able to see the trends over time in terms of how these attack vectors are changing. And one of the important things for VMware was having a solution that could be end-to-end. With the acquisition of Carbon Black, and now we're getting it integrated more deeply into the VMware solutions, we have things like agentless protection now with Carbon Black sitting in the hypervisor. So being able to not only protect the endpoints with Carbon Black, which is an awesome solution, but actually being able to try and get that more ubiquitous across the entire landscape so that you can get a single view of what's going on inside your environment. So, this is something that's been happening. I think COVID really accelerated what was already happening in the market up until this point. And I think, VMware is well positioned to be able to help customers really leverage solutions like Carbon Black to help protect them.
So this all, I think, leads us into the concept that we've heard arguably before even COVID, but I think this this entire threat landscape change based on the pandemic really drives home the concept of zero trust, right? We've talked about zero trust in the past, but the concept of really, and zero trust is a little bit of a misnomer, right? We don't want to tell our employees we have zero trust in them whatsoever, but we do want to trust and verify, right? Trust and verify that, number one, they are who they say they are, and they're not someone that is taking advantage of social engineering and is trying to impersonate a licensed or credentialed individual. Number two, trust but verify that the device and the environment they're both accessing and using to access is safe, secure, and appropriately protected. And then third and finally, making sure that we have appropriate policies and controls that in the event that something does occur, unfortunately, we have the ability to recover and quickly come back from that. Jim, I wanted to put you on the spot here for a second and get your thoughts coming from the financial industry and similar compliant industries. What's been your experience in the zero trust arena?
Yeah, Jeremy, I actually absolutely agree. Trust but verify has been in my nomenclature working in the financial industry. The previous slide I thought was interesting that, you know, the attacks are increasing around the finance and healthcare industries, and partly because I think they're still very much, even in a COVID environment, thriving a little bit. It might be in a different format, but they're still thriving. And so I think that, yeah, that's why you have to be careful. But it's truly, I think, something that you should do, not just now, but for everything in the future.
Now, there's one item on here that is not included in a traditional zero trust, but something I think is critical that we should all be very aware of, which is constant reinforcement of social engineering, exposure, knowledge, and training to our employees and to our staff. Right? Is as we look at the attack vectors, the majority of attack vectors today are not bad actors coming in, you know, from a third party. But they're folks that are actually getting our employees to do something either through ignorance or through simple negligence to do something that opens a way for a bad actor to come into our environment. So the constant reinforcement of social engineering, security awareness, the fact that you don't do things like clicking on links or following URLs you don't know or downloading content from sites that you can't verify or save, just all of those basic fundamental tasks are something that remain a consistent requirement for us to not only train on, but reinforce on an ongoing basis. Corinne, I'm also curious, the 3-2-1-1-0 strategy from Veeam has been something we've heard a lot about, and I like the 1 and 0. I'm wondering if you could just take a few minutes and go into that for a moment and help us understand the concepts there and some of the additional protections.
Yeah, and just to refer to it, I like to call it the backup zip code, just because we've reached 5 numbers now. A lot of us are already familiar with the 3-2-1 part at the beginning, but yeah, the 1 and the 0 become the critical steps, I think, into protecting against ransomware. The 1 means instead of just having one copy at an offsite location, it means having one copy that's either offline or immutable, meaning that nothing can directly attack it from your network. And then a 0 means that you're actually testing your backups and verifying that you're able to recover the data that you expect to recover when the time comes, whether it's through like automated testing or if you manually go in once in a while and see if you can do a restore. So those are the 2 things. You don't know if you have a good backup unless you test it, and having something that you know is not going to be affected by ransomware, such as like an object storage object lock, or something to do with maybe a rotated offline hard drive, or even tape. I'd say tape is a great protection against ransomware. It's inherently immutable against ransomware attacks, and even if a tape server does get attacked, most of the time it's just the header and you can still recover that data.
Interesting. That's good, and you're right. We haven't typically thought about offline, right, or immutable backups as part of that strategy. So that's a good additive factor. With regard to now taking a little bit more of a forward look, one of the things that we've heard quite a bit about, and I'm sure everyone on the bridge here would agree, we hear the word digital transformation quite a bit, right? Unfortunately, that's one of those terms. If you ask 10 people, you're going to get 12 different definitions. Sean, I know that VMware has built quite a knowledge base and a position around digital transformation. I'm wondering if you could sort of give us a few opinions and definitions from your experience on what that actually means to folks here and then how they can leverage.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, digital transformation means many different things to many different people. And that's rightfully so, because there isn't really one definition for what digital transformation is all about. But if you really want to have a look at it at a high level, it's a lot of different things that need to be done in order to make sure that organizations keep up with changes. So one of the main things that's driving digital transformation is growth. More than half of the CEOs out there are saying that this is still something that is strategic for their businesses. So COVID isn't slowing down the need for digital transformation. If anything, it's speeding it up, right? And digital transformation is seen as a real top-line driver to enable those CEOs to achieve revenue growth and growth within their organizations. So digital transformation is kind of something that's been around for many years. VMware has been a instrumental driver in a lot of the virtualization technologies that actually enable a lot of the digital transformation that's going on in organizations today, which kind of leads us into, if you want to go to the next slide, Jeremy, the digital divide, right? And from a VMware perspective, this is a slide that we try to use with customers to almost shock them into understanding where they're going to be in that digital divide. And really, you're on one side or the other. You're either a laggard/follower, or you're an adopter/leader in the digital transformation era. And I think it's very, very good for people to make a conscious decision about where they see themselves within this environment. So, again, 53% of spending will go directly to digital transformation. This is something that is happening. It's ongoing. It's never going to, it's never going to be something that we're not going to be talking about. Where do you see yourselves from an organization perspective in terms of getting ahead of digital transformation? It helps lower costs. It helps you to compete with your competition more effectively, because hopefully your competition are laggards and followers, and you're going to be able to benefit if you are really in front of what everybody is doing. So things like DevOps, AI, all the kind of new terms that are coming to this arena. People say it's new, but a lot of these things have been around for many, many years, right? So machine learning has been something that's been, in the manufacturing industries and things like that for ages. It's really just becoming, an in thing to talk about based on where we are today. So, I would stress to everybody who's watching this today, decide where you fall in this, and make conscious decisions about trying to be in the adopters/leaders side of the slide. A lot of the work that we are doing from a VMware perspective, and Veeam is also involved in this, around the modernization of the solutions that you guys, Jeremy, Otava, are bringing to the market, are really enablers to help your customers be on the right-hand side of this slide, essentially. You want to...
It's interesting. Just one point I would make here, right? One of the challenges that IT has always had historically, right, is they never had a seat at the leadership table, right? They never had a true seat at the C-suite table. And yep. I think we're seeing business transformation being that catalyst that changes that dynamic, right? Now IT is no longer simply a cost line on a balance sheet, right? IT becomes a business strategy that
Yeah.
really compete and succeed.
100%, right? That ability to be agile has historically been, a major blocker from an IT perspective. You don't go into an organization and talk to that organization and they generally say to you, oh, our IT department is awesome. They're agile, they're responsive. It's normally quite the opposite when you go in and speak to most companies. IT is almost seen as a hindrance to getting things done. Digital transformation is really helping IT become, as you said, their well-deserved seat at the table, and actually enabling these things that help organizations drive, digital transformation, sure, but that's not really what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is build your business, drive revenue growth, reduce costs, and become much more agile when you have to respond to things like COVID, for example. The companies who were agile have managed to respond in a far more appropriate way to this, and we've seen this with many of our providers who, like yourselves, Otava, have been pretty much fairly well prepared to be able to meet the demand of customers, whether it's some form of end user computing that they required, or more infrastructure in the cloud, because now they need to work in a different sort of environment. So I think it's a key driver to businesses.
Perfect. And it's interesting, right? We think about digital transformation, right? How does that become real for organizations? And this is an interesting fact, right? From Frost and Sullivan, 75% of IT leaders say cloud. Well, cloud isn't a silver bullet, right? But I think what we see here, Sean, is the move from organizations trying to get out of the traditional buy, build, own, operate model, right? Capital intensive, long amortization periods, have to go through capital acquisition and approval processes, and moving that more towards the concept of an OpEx business structure that is far more agile, far more responsive to what arguably is a very dynamic marketplace today that changes, week over week, month over month. Would you concur?
Exactly right. And until fairly recently, whenever somebody talked about the cloud, they were talking either about AWS, Azure, or GCP, right? That's the cloud. Until recently, that was what everybody considered the cloud to be. VMware has done a lot of work to try and make sure that, workloads are placed in the right place. Because AWS is out there, it doesn't mean that everything moves to AWS. There are many workloads which shouldn't be in AWS because they don't meet the requirements, or the costs generally, go through the roof when you move your entire business to AWS or Azure or GCP. I'm not picking on any particular one. And so what VMware has been working on, and you'll hear more and more of this hybrid cloud type offerings, but also, Otava has a public cloud offering similar in terms of the way that the underpinnings work to AWS and Azure and GCP, and many others will too. So, the cloud is not just the hyperscalers. The cloud is Otava, being able to provide solutions for their customers that kind of meet their needs. The hyperscalers don't meet every single need that's out there. So being able to leverage Otava to provide some level of that OpEx cloud that you were talking about, Jeremy, where they can have an environment where they can burst up and down, they can add more today, tomorrow they don't need it, and so on, really gives your customers a great opportunity to move to the cloud and actually leverage all the wonderfulness that they've already used in their environments.
And Jeremy, if I could just for a second, I think one of the reasons this number is so high is that a lot of IT leaders want to keep their legacy applications where they are. And because digital is something new, going to the cloud is an easy way to introduce it into an environment.
I would say the biggest thing isn't just going to be the word cloud. It's going to be multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. These private cloud institutions are going to be for your IT service providers. You're going to be doing these public clouds for your main workloads. And then all of the collaborative SaaS tools that are offered through it. I'd say cloud's a much bigger word than just infrastructure. It's everything that we can move up to there. And the fact that there's all kinds of different clouds that meet all of our needs, which is why I think this number is so high.
Well, that's interesting, Corinne, and it really, I think it speaks to, and I'd like to get panelists' opinion on this, it speaks to the concept that application or business processes, right, which are application-based for the most part today, there's an optimal place for every business process. And that could be in any number of cloud, air quotes there, instances, right? Be it a software as a service application like a Salesforce or something like that, be it a hosted cloud, be it a quick build and tear down environment for DevOps, for agile stand up and tear down of services, or be it the hybridity between many of those instances, so that IT organizations and the business as a whole doesn't introduce additional complexity into the consumption of those services. So I'm curious, sort of where we see this ultimately headed from a not only a calendar 21 but futuristically looking perspective.
So I'll jump in there. So yeah, I mean, that multi-cloud, hybrid cloud concept is a key driver, as you said, Jeremy, and Corinne, you also mentioned that. And, you know, the other thing you have to consider is that not every single workload can move to a cloud environment. Even if it should be there, it can't necessarily move there. There's a lot of app redesign, a lot of rebuilding that has to take place, right? And VMware's done quite a bit of research on this, and on average, and you'll be amazed by this number, on average, a single application to move to the cloud costs in excess of $2 million. So, you know, if you look at those kinds of numbers, having a hybrid / multi-cloud solution is really the way to go, because you can embrace both, you know, the cloud optimized SaaS solutions, but maintain a lot of what you do today really well inside a hybrid / multi-cloud environment.
Yeah, and what I would tell you, Jeremy, is that you know, when you look at 2021 and beyond, I think there's still just a large amount of organizations that haven't done much with cloud. So the amount of opportunity to grow and for those IT organizations to take cloud on, I think is going to continue to be growing exponentially in the future.
So and I think we're onto something here, right? That aligns pretty well to what we see from IT priorities, right? So Tech Republic, as referenced here on the slide, you'll see, has done a really good job of culling and aggregating a number of research articles from Gartner, IDC, Forrester, et cetera, that really sort of look at how the pandemic sort of has taken our calendar year 2021 strategy and evolved into something different. Topping the list, obviously, as should be no surprise to everyone, is the need to now connect a distributed workforce into our tools and solutions, right? Certainly a driver for cloud adoption, certainly a driver for more secure connectivity and mobility, right? Including application virtualization, right? How do I take a legacy application and now SaaSify it, to use a very generic term? Following close by that, as we talked about earlier, is the need to ensure that we've got appropriate security. In fact, as it relates to IT, we see that over half of organizations surveyed, IT spending has not changed. What the spend is, though, is the piece that is changing or evolving. So those two really are leading the charge there from an IT budget priority perspective. I'm curious, team, do we see that same trend in industries and markets that you all have been involved with?
I would say yes. I know at least my business itself has faced a lot of at-home workers, as well as us reaching out to our end customers. No one seems to be in office, and a lot of those physical projects have turned into virtual projects and a whole different type of workload that needs to be accounted for. The types of education that we're going to be going out and doing for these end users, I would say remote technologies and spending on more security should also include the education of those end users. We've seen it time and time again, about 87% less likely to be attacked by just in the basic phishing if you've educated your end users to look out for those kinds of emails. That's a lot of protection just by giving a couple seminars.
Yeah, so I'll say a couple of things. So, Karine, exactly what you just mentioned, internally within VMware, our IT department does a really good job of education. We often get phishing emails and things like this that are actually set up by IT. And it's actually quite interesting because we watch the Slack channels and people start talking about, oh, that was a really cool attempt to get us to click something, right? And our IT internally within VMware has taken a lead in trying to do that kind of thing. The education is more important than anything else, right? You can have so many checks and balances and trust and verifiers and things like that, but there's always a way around those things. So education kind of closes that gap between, what you can do with solutions to the bits that are left over that really require education from your workforce, essentially. To answer your question, Jeremy, I think, certainly from a VMware's perspective, what we've seen aligns with this. The spend has changed, but it hasn't gone down, right? So VMware is still doing well relative to the overall expectations from the business perspective. But obviously, where the spend is going is changing slightly. So things like our Horizon, desktop solution is obviously, off the chart in terms of growth numbers over the last few months, purely because companies weren't prepared. They didn't have a solution that allowed them to scale up and scale down desktops, for example, which is a requirement in this environment. And I see actually eBay asked a question, do we think that work from home is also a driver to the cloud? Sure it is. And one of the key things there is, if you consider the connectivity that generally cloud providers have, and whether this is a hyperscaler or an Otava or any cloud provider, the connectivity that they have into the rest of the world is obviously going to be a lot better than what a typical organization would have, right? So being able to have a whole lot of remote desktops all connected at the same time, is going to be much better handled by a cloud provider than you could do it as an organization yourself. So even if you did use remote desktops in your local office connected to, your local data center, everything would be fine. But as soon as you start moving out of that environment and people work from home, the connectivity into that environment is an issue. So those companies are being, I won't say forced, but encouraged to put those solutions into the cloud where the connectivity is a lot better. Companies like Otava that have the ability to handle those peaks in data throughput, because it's changing. It's just not going away. It's just changing.
Yeah, as a sideline, Jeremy, I would point out that during COVID, I was actually able to do a data center migration from my home office. So the amount of technology that we can do is much more increased. I would have never thought of being able to do that, but migrated customers in the cloud in one data center to the cloud in another data center and never had to leave my home. So I think we're going to see more and more people doing that, but bigger projects too that we wouldn't have thought of before.
So it's interesting, Jim, and thank you for pointing that out. It does align really with the third metric that we see from our research here, which is not simply a transitory move to distributed workforce, but a permanent move, where organizations are looking at this now with historic data showing increases in productivity, as well as reductions in cost of organizational flooring and similar. The desire to sustain or maintain this distributed workforce. So as we look across our multiple industries or multiple markets out there, we see a couple interesting data points arise. Number one is resource constraints, right? Becoming more critical. We now see ourselves truly competing from a resource acquisition and talent acquisition in a global market, right? We're no longer fettered by a physical geography or a physical domain that, yes, limited our candidate pool, but also kept our competition maybe at arm's length if they were not in that same physical geography. Now we've got the ability to reach anywhere almost that we have a need. Cybersecurity becomes critical, right? Compliance needs continue. Compliance hasn't changed as a result of this. In fact, some of the compliance regulations have actually been somewhat relaxed. However, I think as we all would agree, if you're in a compliant market, and Jim, I'd be curious to see your thoughts on this from a finance perspective, it becomes more difficult to maintain and audit and control in a distributed model, right? Which I think, again, goes back to the concept of if we can keep applications and services in a centralized environment and only provide access to those applications and services as opposed to a traditional distributed compute model, we maintain a better compliant posture.
Yeah, so I would agree. I mean, certainly the financial industry has a lot of regulations and compliance and not just the same ones that a normal organization would go through. But to your point, the audit function becomes a lot harder. And now you need people that understand not only the audit function, but distributed computing, so they know actually where to go to look at things. So I agree 100% with your comment there.
Which is now going into more of a forward-looking model, right? Let's think about how this is going to affect investment, right? Organizational investment in IT tools, resources, etc. We look at 21 now from an investment perspective. No surprise here, right? Digital transformation, as we've discussed, in the move to cloud, and again, cloud is don't look at that as simply a single solution, but the multi-cloud portfolio of options that are available. IT spending declined a little bit in 20. That was expected. However, we see that it's still fairly strong in 21 going forward. We see infrastructure and similar spend to increase. And again, based on some of the pivots here, we see overall economic spending. IT is going to outpace that in 21 based on some of the concepts that we've talked about, right? The move to digital transformation, the move to empowering and connecting a digital or distributed workforce, and the move to organizations looking to better secure, better audit, better maintain, better control access and data to minimize their risk portfolio. So one of the biggest challenges here that we see is how do we embrace this sort of digital transformation move? How do we embrace the concept of moving to cloud, right? That's a pretty big statement. What does that actually mean? How do we break that down or decompile that into actionable steps? And more importantly, how do we give the business the outcomes, right? The end state that they're expecting to receive from a strategic perspective through IT tools and resources. So I think this leads us to maybe a good area of conversation here, which is what do we see at macro level in terms of how those high level macro strategies are actually being realized. Sean, Corinne, Jim, curious to see here, right? We've got sort of six general big rocks here, but let's break these down a little bit, right? Sean, I know that you talked about hybrid cloud a little bit prior. Could you help take us a little, maybe a step deeper into that, as well as multi-cloud?
Sure. Yeah. So hybrid cloud is really enabling customers to who need to, for example, maintain an on-prem environment. It might be compliance requirements. It might be latency. There's many reasons why they may want to maintain an on-prem environment. But there's nothing to stop a customer from also having a cloud environment, which allows them to, through solutions that you guys are deploying, like VMware Cloud Director and things like that, where you can have a ubiquitous interface that manages a hybrid cloud environment, i.e. it has some elements perhaps on-prem, some of them are SaaS elements, some of them are in the Otava cloud, really enabling organizations to bring these things all together and look at them as a single entity from a resource pool perspective. So, the X as a service is really a driver behind being able to provide solutions that can leverage, various different clouds, because there are reasons to have different clouds. And, multi-cloud is really, looking at leveraging solutions from multiple providers, because different providers provide different things better than others, right? A lot of the functions as a service that AWS and GCE are providing differ from each other. And sometimes a customer might want to use both, right? So being able to connect to multiple clouds ubiquitously through, for example, Otava providing the enablement here, allows customers to really leverage the best in breed of what they're looking for, right? It's not coming all from one place. It really can come from multiple sources. And having an enabler is really important in that process.
I think you make a great point about how all of these cloud offerings, especially when it comes to SaaS, offer great platform exploration for different fields. Like, I'd say Google does have a excellent top tier when it comes to education, and then Microsoft's taking over our business market the best that they can. And all of these different cloud applications, such as AWS, going into the container market full bore. Knowing which application and which market is best for your business, I think can help us get into the cloud with less convoluted infrastructure components, meaning that we're less likely to have security vulnerabilities too. The more complex and the more that you have to do within your environment to get yourself to the next environment just opens you up to so many security and flaws, just not knowing. I mean, it just comes down to knowing which one provides your best migration up.
And that's a segue, Corinne, into the next one, which is how do organizations, right? We think about multiple cloud solutions out there, right? Every cloud solution is unique or different. And this is one of the things that I really like about the VMware vision. How do we extend a common control plane, a common way to understand, manage, audit, report on, and consume services from a multiple number of providers, right? In the past, we've had issues where organizations have consumed services from multiple platforms and had to learn each and every platform, which dramatically increases cost, increases complexity, and in many ways, unfortunately, impacts negatively agility, right? Because now you've got subject matter experts you have to engage depending on where those services or workloads end up being. Whereas the concept of having a single control plane, a single management layer that sits on top of all of these different service providers or areas that we're consuming, to give us a single user experience for the organization, a single way to control and audit and manage our platforms, and a single way for our business users who are not technologists, right, to consume and use those services, help us maintain that agility. Jim, I'm curious from your perspective, right? Have you had experience in that, and how has that sort of been able to impact your I guess your clients, right? Looking at it from an IT perspective, in larger businesses in your history.
Yeah, Jeremy, I think that part of it is, and I think Sean even hit on this point, IT's responsibility to educate people in the business on how to do that. So my experience has been, it is have to be really a driver from the IT organization, and I think these are fairly new concepts for the business. I do think if you look at the last one, application modernization, I think that will drive a lot of this to multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, because we still have an inordinate amount of applications that were written years ago and are still residing in the same environment that they had been. And so I think those are all combining, which is why it shows up on technology trends for the next few years.
Yeah, I think that goes hand in hand right with edge computing. We think about healthcare organizations as an example, right? The concept of having crash carts in the ER now being IoT enabled, where every single component in that crash cart is automatically managed, cataloged, inventoried, and as soon as it's used, it's registered back into the organization's practice management platform to really speed billing metrics, to speed patient billing and transparency into consumption and similar practices. That really dramatically reduces cost of service delivery for companies, and that's just one example of how some of the major healthcare practices are combating a dramatically increased volume of patients and volume of patient management without dramatically increasing staff and allocated costs. I'm curious, Corinne or Sean, have you seen similar applications maybe in healthcare or other markets like that?
I've seen an uptick in software as a service types of applications. We've seen some of our highest numbers, at least on the backup side, for people adopting the Office 365 backup software just because there's so many people moving up that quickly.
Yeah, and I think VMware's focus is a lot of SaaS offerings that help accelerate that move to a more SaaS-like environment. And while Jim was talking there, or Jeremy, I can't remember who mentioned the crash cart. I think it was you, Jeremy, the crash cart thing. I don't know if anybody watches Grey's Anatomy, but there was an episode where there was a crash cart going around the ER that had an infection inside it. And as that crash cart was moving around, people were being infected by something that otherwise they wouldn't have been infected by. And this is a prime use case for that IoT edge kind of scenario, right? Where you have that crash cart connected up to a real-time statistical environment with some AI on it that says, hold on a second, 3 people that have used this crash cart have all suddenly come down with a certain infection. Flag that crash cart as it needs to be checked out, right? So, that's a really simple solution to a problem that, is all too endemic in the overall society. That was just an example, but, being able to do those kinds of things through connected devices, into these cloud environments saves lives, right? It's a very pertinent example of doing that.
It's funny that you mentioned that happened on Grey's Anatomy. It also happened on The Residents, and it's so common needing to know where that's tracked, and those types of diseases just go through buildings if you don't have proper tracking systems.
Yeah, exactly. And AI and cloud computing helps drive that kind of resolution.
No matter how big the business is, I think every statistic report I've read, healthcare and education have been at the top of those for the #1 places to have attacks happen as well.
Interesting. And that I think a lot of this data really leads us to thinking about some general macro level predictions, right? If we look at some of the pundits from Gartner and others that really think about how do we adopt and evolve into sort of what will become our go forward strategy long term, right? Certainly, we have to respond to what's going on in the market, what's going on in the industry, what's going on in our customer environments, et cetera. We have to make sure that we recover our standard business practices, right? We have to get back to a baseline performance level in the organization. But more importantly, we have to focus then on how do we continue growth? How do we continue acceleration? How do we continue to get the business outcomes we're looking for? But how do we take and integrate our learnings that we've seen from the current business as usual, the current pandemic stress, the current threat landscape, the current changes in the way we connect with employees, with customers, with markets, and work that into a renewable continuous improvement process for the organization at a strategic level. And all of this, right, is good analyst speak. But really, from an organization, I think it does put down to some of the concepts we've talked about from a digital transformation perspective. How do we leverage the tools that we have available? How do we take advantage of what's available to us from a secret sauce perspective, right? And best apply those in our representative organizations to get the outcomes, right? This is all about business outcomes. It's not about technology. How do we get the business outcomes of growth, of customer retention, of customer connection that we expect in this new way of conducting business? Panelists, closing thoughts here on what we see on the advent for 21 and beyond.
I'd say cloud and OpEx is going to be one of our key drivers. All of our physical projects, or many of the physical projects that we had planned for this last year and the coming year, have been all but set to a halt, and a lot of the 2 to 3 year out plans for, hey, we should move to cloud or consider to move to cloud, got accelerated. And throughout all of these accelerations, some of us have kind of forgotten exactly what we're going to need to investigate in order for protection, what type of education we're going to have to give to our end users. And this is going to be, I think, the biggest topic is what is the best way to migrate and what is the best way to still stay protected. And education, I think, is going to be the biggest explosion we see, and even against remote workers, because we have kids on our laptops doing and downloading all kinds of things that we don't want them to download, and this data is going to need protected probably a little bit more critically than I'd hope an educated adult might do in the future.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think, OpEx is a big driver, especially when things are so fluid as they are with COVID right now. Having a more OpEx-focused model really helps be more agile from an organizational perspective. And yeah, I mean, security, right? It's all about that. Again, the acquisition of Carbon Black is a key indicator to where the environment is going. It's all about being able to actually protect and manage what's going on inside your organization, one, and two, having visibility to actually what's going on. It's all well and good having checks and balances, but if you can't see what's actually going on, that also is a problem. So you really need to look at it from both angles.
Yeah, and Jeremy, I would echo what Sean and Corinne have already said, but one thing I would add to it is I think there will be more focus around compliancy. Are we compliant? How do we, continue to make sure we're compliant across the enterprise and educate people on what compliance in our particular industry means? Because, finance compliance is different than healthcare compliance, and I think those things are going to be really focused because of the security aspects of what both Sean and Corinne have said.
Excellent, excellent. I do want to close today's session with just a little bit about Otava. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are, as has been mentioned, a global cloud provider. We are not the AWS or the Azures of the world, but we are, I think, the best of the rest in terms of a compliant hosted platform. In addition, one of the key things that I think is applicable in the short term, right, is additional data protection, additional continuity protection, specifically with the advent of increased ransomware attacks and the assurance that organizations can recover information from a secure, immutable, and non-disruptive manner in the unfortunate event that you may become attacked or compromised. So with that said, we do want to close with an offer for those attending today. Try us out, right? Kick the tires. Take advantage of this. You all will receive a copy of this deck as an attendee of today's session. Take an opportunity, try it out, see if it works for you, increase your protection posture. With that said, I will wrap with some Q&A. Again, all of these notes as well as a recording of today's session will be provided. But what questions can we answer for you with the ability of our panelists here? How can we help you think about or discuss your 21 objectives? All right, we'll leave the ability for questions open, team, but feel free to check out our other videos as shown here on the link. Do block your calendars for October 8th. We'll be discussing the next version of Java with Otava, so keep your eyes open for that. And with that said, I absolutely want to thank Sean, Corinne, Jim. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning. Appreciate your thoughts, your insight, and look forward to continuing the conversations with our clients and our partners moving forward. So thank you very much, and attendees, appreciate your time as well this morning. Look for our continued follow-up again with the recording, and look forward to connecting you again in October 8th webinar.
Thank you, Jeremy and Sean and Corinne, and to all the participants. Appreciate you guys hanging in there and participating with us.
Yep.
I want to thank the invite. This was a great session.
Yep. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for inviting us. Hopefully we can help all your customers that attended this session be more successful in COVID times, and everybody stay safe.
Take care, everybody.
Cheers all. Bye.